Chapter 9, Protecting Future Supply Chains from the Boom. Quote, even with all our technology and the inventions that make modern life so much easier than it once was, it takes just one big natural disaster to wipe all of that away and remind us that, here on Earth, we're still at the mercy of nature, unquote. Neil deGrasse Tyson, American astrophysicist, author, and science celebrity. Risk is everywhere and nowhere all at once, whether it's crossing the street, driving to the store, using a cell phone, or base jumping off skyscrapers. We're continually learning about risk, from childhood and finding out about the world to when we're old and in need of care from others. We pass these risks on to our kids, our friends, and others with whom we come into contact. Watch out for the rattlesnake over there, or don't get involved with that pyramid scheme. When it comes to protecting our supply chains, we possess the skills necessary to at least identify the likely vectors of attack. So how do we make risk identification and mitigation an everyone opportunity? Risk is liminal, not in your fancy boxes. Risk does not fit nicely into boxes that match organizational employee hierarchies. Risk has no boundaries. It lives in liminal spaces. Liminal spaces occupy the space between two existing things. For example, the time between dusk to dawn, which is neither night nor day, is a liminal space. As we design and secure supply chains, we need to look for the liminal spaces between our organization and our third parties. That is where today's risk lives. It's also where tomorrow's risk lives. The thawing of the Arctic, the exploration and colonization of Mars, and ownership of cyberspace are just a few examples of risks sitting in liminal spaces. For example, who owns cyberspace? Is it the internet backbone providers? Is it the cloud infrastructure providers? Is it the nonprofit organizations? Is it governments? We live in the digital age where we rely so much on instantaneous communication, so we had better get a handle on this. Again, this highlights the limitation of risk visualization tools. They show that which is known, useful for situational awareness, but they do not show us the liminal risk, that which is unknown. Hacking makes our supply chain stronger. In 2013, my brother had an illuminating experience when he stepped into a hotel elevator with his then 7-year-old daughter, Kalea. Upon entering the elevator, and without prompting, she started punching buttons on the elevator in a seemingly random sequence. When asked what she was doing, Kalea responded by saying that if she touched the buttons in a certain sequence, the elevator bypassed all the other floors and went straight to the lobby. My brother, a chief information security officer and certified security specialist, was blown away. He asked her where she learned that trick, and she said a video on YouTube. It never occurred to my brother, or even myself, that we could simply search for a hack to bypass stopping at other floors on the elevator. Hacker cybersecurity specialist and associate professor at Emory University, Emir Vigfussson, delivered a TED Talk titled, "You Should Learn How to Hack." Vigfusson's argument was that, quote, everyone should know how to hack because you can't play effective defense unless you understand the offense, unquote. If we as a community have any chance of securing our global supply chains, we need to start thinking about how nefarious characters are looking to break our operations. He highlights 3 traits of hackers: failure, curiosity, and experimentation. The whole process of hacking is predicated on failure, much like variability associated with gambling. Hackers spend days, weeks, or even months failing at their objective. But as Vigfussson notes, quote, failure is something that hackers are particularly good at. In fact, failure just energizes us to keep going, to keep hacking, to try to push the boundary of the system that we're trying to tinker with, and it just increases the bliss that we feel once we ultimately break in, unquote. Perhaps the most important skills hackers possess is curiosity. They always look at a target and consider where the vulnerabilities reside. Systems, whether analog or digital, are designed to operate one way, and hackers look for ways to make the system work in other ways that suit their needs. In the analog world, imagine you live in a Bay Area city and on a one-way street that has a history of devastating fires. Over time, new people move into the neighborhood, and because they don't know the history, they engage in dangerous and illegal behavior, such as parking in such a way that impedes emergency vehicle access or using open fire pits. Let's say you notify the city, but they don't have a process or willingness to notify the neighbors. Can you hack the system to change the neighbor's behavior? What if, hypothetically speaking, you create a mailer with the City of Oakland and Oakland Fire Department logos, and you clearly articulate the local fire history and city ordinances, all information presented in a way that conveys authority? If you did such a thing, and the neighbor started changing their behavior by parking legally and not blocking the road, then this would be an example of hacking an analog system. Again, all hypothetical, of course. For cyber hacking, it's similar, even more precise. Digital systems are constrained by the embedded software. For example, login pages require an underlying action after the user submits their username and password. But if you figure out what the underlying system is expecting, in this case a properly formatted username and password, then you can modify the input you provide. For example, when you enter the username and password, you can include some extra code that gets executed. The underlying system cannot defend against the extra code submitted because it only looks for a username and password. Once we can successfully talk to the underlying system through the login page, we can start asking the system to take actions like showing all the users in the database. In his TED Talk, Vig Fusson illustrates this for the audience. Take these two examples and apply them to a supply chain with 30,000 third parties, and you could start to see the exponential problem of analog and digital hacking. How many of your processes can get socially re-engineered? How many of your digital systems can be manipulated if nefarious characters flood them with unexpected data? I believe that each of us in our respective organizations should look at how third parties can be used to introduce risk. When third parties know the enterprise is better than the employees working for them, that is a problem. We often see this with software and tech providers, but it's also an issue with consulting and legal providers. The relationships developed with the business, and especially leaders, can leave the enterprise vulnerable to misinformation attacks, deliberate or accidental, cyber breaches, and physical threats. Vig Fusson says that failure, curiosity, and experimentation are the building blocks of a hacking culture. Deployed against our organizations, the approach is terrifying, but used internally, this culture of hacking will make our enterprises more secure. Creating our own culture of hacking will lead to better cyber practices and help overcome the fraud that is cybersecurity education. The biggest risk to your supply chain operations is email. You and I will get hacked in our lifetimes, if you haven't already on LinkedIn, Hotmail, Yahoo, and elsewhere. This was unfathomable just a decade ago, but given the preponderance of information we store digitally and the increase in successful cyber attacks, you should expect all your data emails to be dumped online. You should expect that you have malware on your phone or PC at any given time, and you should most assuredly expect to be hit by ransomware. We are at war. Let me rephrase that. Every country is at digital war with every country. All countries are continually spying on one another. One crucial way we can protect ourselves from these threats is to stop sending important information via email. We need to think like a hacker and try to understand how a nefarious character would attempt to breach our supply chain systems. Not every enterprise uses SAP. Not every enterprise uses Oracle. Not every enterprise uses Amazon Web Services. But absolutely every enterprise uses email. And email is a very insecure protocol. Therefore, if I'm a hacker, I'm going to target the most widely used insecure tool, email. This begs the question, why are we sending emails with links and attachments, whether they're RFPs, specifications, or even invoices? I have a CPG client that accepts about 90% of supplier invoices through email. This makes it super easy for the suppliers. They simply generate an invoice from their finance system and email it. Once the email is received, the payables clerk manually enter the information into the finance system for payment. If there are questions, the clerks go back and forth with the supplier over email to clarify and fix errors. To put this in perspective, most of my clients have at least 70% of invoices going through an e-invoicing system. I thought this couldn't get any worse until I explained the problem to the client, who was not grasping the seriousness of the problem, so I went to their public web page and found the email address for where to send invoices and a very helpful list of fields to fill out when submitting an invoice. I'm sure this information was put on the website to reduce the number of emails back and forth between suppliers and my client's finance department. While that makes sense from an efficiency point of view, in terms of security, this is a disaster waiting to happen. If I take a hacking mindset to this, I could simply generate a random and fake invoice and send it in. Naturally, and hopefully, the accounts payable clerk would figure out that my invoice was fake. But how much effort was expended doing that? What if I submit 100, 1,000, or 10,000 emails per hour? Resources have to be expended to address each email. However, it gets worse. By design, if I'm sending an email with an invoice attachment, the AP clerk has to open the email attachment. What if my fake invoice is really ransomware, waiting for an unsuspecting person to open it? Remember the first rule of all useless cyber training: don't click on the attachment. So why does my client put human users in a situation where they have to open the attachment? The way to solve this is to plumb the supplier's finance system to the client's finance system, or move the supplier into a third-party solution that puts in layers of defense. This is where digital fluency comes into play. Middle managers, including my client, need to be aware of these security gaps. Accepting an invoice solution that is not directly connected to suppliers is a dereliction of duty and a major breach waiting to happen. The fact that we are not using collaboration tools for third-party management is setting us up for digital breaches. We need to stop emailing documents. We will know we have succeeded when we use fit-for-purpose collaboration systems to share information directly. Sourcing tools for bidding events, SRM tools for relationship management, and P2P systems for invoicing. Of course, this means we need a smart front door to organize this for suppliers. Data exchange with third parties will come to define the 21st century supply chain. Whether it is risk management, ESG opportunities, innovation opportunities, supply assurance, legislative compliance, or simply creating an efficiently running supply chain, everything will increasingly rely on a steady stream of data. That means we will need to plumb a continual data flow from supplier systems to our enterprise systems and back again. But data exchange is not enough. We have to take that data and make it meaningful by understanding how the business objectives can be changed, modified, or enhanced by what's happening in the world. For example, let's take an oil and gas company that wants to get into electric charging stations. First, there's procuring the charging technology. That's simple enough, and will come from a new set of suppliers. Of course, the near monopolistic demand power that oil and gas companies held in the age of carbon no longer applies here. The underlying components of EV chargers rely on downstream electronic components that feed into many other technology devices, such as smartphones, tablets, and automobiles. Additionally, many entities, such as local, state, federal governments, are putting in EV charging stations themselves. Then there is the question of real estate. Do you put EV chargers at existing gas stations, or do you create EV-only stations? And since consumers will need to wait while their car is charging, does this change where you locate these stations and the types of services provided? Perhaps most importantly, because EV chargers can be smart devices, they can call back to the corporations that own them. Again, this is an example of the reverse flow of data back into the supply chain system. So here we have a clear example of collecting data and payments that get transferred directly. This presents a few problems and opportunities. For example, we need to be able to collect the payments and process them. Then we need to ensure that the chargers are being maintained, which can be optimized significantly better by collecting and analyzing the data coming back. Then, of course, we need to make sure that we are doing proper risk management. Because if you install an EV charger as a nefarious actor, all I have to do is buy or steal one of said chargers, tear it down, hack it, and learn how to bypass all the controls so that I can route the payments back to my bank account. Speaking of banks, drawing back to the robbing a bank example, how many EV chargers are left unattended for days, weeks, or months on end before they are operational? How closely are they being monitored? Look at any new parking lot construction and you will see EV charging spots and technology being deployed long before the lot becomes operational. The Idaho National Laboratory did an extensive teardown on electric vehicle charging equipment and found the underlying operating system was running an old, non-secured version of the Linux operating system. These holes compromised the systems, making stealing both financial and personal information possible. Or these systems can be taken over and used as zombie machines to conduct distributed denial of service attacks. Hacking electric vehicle charging stations is not a what-if philosophical musing. Shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, hackers compromised charging stations near Moscow as a show of solidarity for Ukrainians. So the question for every supply chain that deploys and supports smart devices and infrastructure and relies on third-party providers is, what are you doing to ensure the equipment is free from and protected against bad actors? This is not something that a survey or a news scraping tool will surface. Designing supply chains for simplicity. In a globalized, disruptive, and digital world, understanding your enterprise system in relation to third parties is the most important activity. For every third party in your systems, you must know who they are, why they're there, and when they're leaving. Correspondingly, when it's time for them to go, you must politely but successfully escort them out of the physical and digital systems. How many suppliers, contractors, and third parties have some physical access to your enterprise? More importantly, we must build a defense in-depth posture in relation to our third parties. That means building concentric circles of defense around our systems. Most enterprises have some sort of supplier segmentation to identify suppliers in cascading levels of importance based on what they supply and the amount of money spent with them. Typically, this is meant to categorize suppliers by value. Basic defense in-depth theories suggest that we should have an intermediary solution that is the first point of interaction with our systems. Then, as suppliers move to greater volume, value, and strategic importance, they can graduate into the core enterprise systems. Otherwise, they should sit in a third-party system, and the relevant metadata, who is paid, when, how much, and core supplier information should be shared. This creates a level of separation between the third party and the enterprise systems. When it comes to attacking your supply chain, nefarious third parties don't care about your organizational structure, your governance, or roles and responsibilities. Enterprise organizational matrices and technical silos prevent the free exchange of data within the company. While this might be good for confidentiality, IT management, or middle management job preservation, this is a killer for risk management. When it comes to attacking your supply chain, nefarious third parties don't care about your organizational structure, your governance, or roles and responsibilities. Enterprise organizational matrices and technical silos prevent the free exchange of data within the company. While this might be good for confidentiality, IT management, or middle management job preservation, this is a killer for risk management. In fact, the more silos, the better for hackers because the less internal sharing of information makes the enterprise less secure. Take, for instance, a CPG client with separate supply chain and procurement organizations. The procurement organization is tasked with third-party risk management. The supply chain organization is tasked with risk to products and materials. Further, a risk center of excellence sits somewhere between the two. The supply chain risk owner looks at material and product risk, while procurement looks at risk from the supplier. On paper, these organizations are supposed to share information. But after talking to them for about 2 minutes, it's clear that they are more concerned with who owns what rather than how to protect the enterprise. This leads them to develop competing tools and capabilities, but without the entirety of the risk data set. If we're doing third-party risk, we must understand the products and materials impacted by each supplier. Conversely, you can't understand the risk to a product or material if you don't know everything about a supplier, namely all of the supplier's locations, operational capabilities, cyber, physical, financial posture, and the end-tier suppliers. Therefore, if we're going to increase the risk management maturity, we need to do our part to create a free-form sharing of information internally. The zero trust concept. One of the most important security methodologies to come about in the past decade is the concept of zero trust. Zero trust, originally conceptualized in a white paper written by Google, assumes that your systems will be breached. It frames the security mindset not to trust any user's device by default, no matter where they originate from, until the device can be properly authenticated. Additionally, there can be zero trust segmentation that further groups and isolates particular devices and users. An oft-cited example is ransomware on a single computer that can be quickly isolated before it spreads to other devices. Further, zero trust calls for the continual monitoring and mitigating impact of a breach. It is important to note that zero trust is a concept that must be adapted, expanded, and customized to every organization. It is meant to be an organizing principle, a singular approach to clarify roles, expectations, and ways of operating internally and externally with third parties. Zero trust is best done with education and collaboration among the third parties. It is not a dictate, but rather a method to create a secure way of operating. The advantage of a zero-trust approach is that it generates the necessary visibility and auditability to effectively respond to and learn from breaches. Naturally, our next-generation supply chains need to be built on a zero-trust methodology. Unfortunately, we've been going in the wrong direction on this. Given the embedded IoT devices, AI, and robots, both physical and virtual, and the preponderance of third-party entities, there is far too much unmanaged information flying around. The failure of big ERP has led to an explosion of point solution supply chain tools, and a get business done at all cost mentality has eviscerated most attempts at a logical security apparatus. In other words, our current third-party security design is broken. To build the next generation supply chain, we need to implement a zero-trust design. Experts estimate that half of all malicious attacks affect small and medium businesses. That means that large numbers of your suppliers are under attack and likely compromised at any given time, whether they or you know it. So now is the perfect time to address these problems. What does zero trust for a supply chain look like? The answer to this will be unique for every enterprise. Please do not read what follows as a treatise or manifesto for the definitive zero trust approach. Rather, this is meant to start a discussion about designing and building zero trust into our supply chains. We need to debate, challenge, and expand what it means to build zero trust supply chains. Using the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is an open source knowledge base of cyber attack techniques and tactics, I created a guide to the components necessary to secure supply chains. This is meant to start the discussion, not be the authoritative perspective. Zero Trust Intelligence. 1. Enumeration. Understand the components of your supply chains, the third parties, and what adversaries might do. 2. Threat vectors. Understand who your adversaries are and what they might do. Identify characteristics of an attack. 3. Situational awareness. Know what's happening in your systems and what are the anomalies. 4. Adversary emulation. We need to hack our systems. We need to attack each individual component to see if the protections are working as expected. We must test reactions to an unexpected event. 5. Shadow systems and devices. Let's stop pretending that everyone's using the corporate-issued laptop that is locked down. This checks the box for the CIO, but absolutely kills productivity. As a result, users will find workarounds that are even worse. For example, our Carney laptops are locked down in such a way that you can't add a home printer because of quote-unquote security concerns. A former colleague bypassed this by simply emailing documents, insecurely of course, to their personal email account on their personal machine and printing from there. Zero Trust Tools. 1. Ring fencing. This means each third party accessing your systems needs to be contained from wreaking havoc on your systems, users, and other third parties. Ring fence each system so that the compromising of one system doesn't take the whole thing down. 2. Multi-factor authentication. Access control is usually managed by something you know, like a password, something you have, key fob, token, or something you are, biometric. Multi-factor authentication means you have 2 or 3 of these. Multi-factor authentication needs to be applied to any connective smart device. We must also apply it to improved API security. 3. Applied security methodology. Many IoT and digital devices are easy to compromise because they either lack security, have not been patched, or still use default security credentials. More importantly, consider who is managing said devices to ensure they remain fully patched. 4. Unmanaged, unsupported tools. Sometimes the greatest security comes from reducing the number of systems, like those 15 supplier portals or SharePoint sites that were spun up for no good reason. 5. Dark data. This is the data that sits unused within an individual computer, a cloud account, or across the organization. It is literally and figuratively a toxic asset. Because we don't see the data, we forget it exists. It is all the files we collect but haven't opened in years. It is the multiple versions of documents, the tools we signed up to try but never bought a license for. Zero Trust People. 1. Individual enhancement. The most common way to attack your supply chain is through phishing or social engineering. We need to train people not to click on the link. We must teach them to phish so they can understand the patterns of phishing and social engineering versus the rote memorization of yesterday's attack. 2. Don't punish failure. If people click on the link and ransomware their computers, we must not punish them. We need to take the opportunity to teach our users what happened so everyone can learn from it. This will allow us to build greater awareness and increase our collective ability to fend off these attacks. Today, we can apply zero trust proactively and voluntarily, but as governments continue to apply more scrutiny and oversight, it will become more commonplace. Moreover, anybody seeking cyber insurance these days will find out that insurers are requiring significantly more and comprehensive protections before underwriting policies. Simultaneously, they are increasing the number of exclusions. This means that the insurance industry is taking cybersecurity vastly more seriously than in the past. Secure supply chain design, digital twins, and multi-enterprise visibility. The digital twin, a digital representation of a physical object, is one of those great phrases that has cachet and gravitas and can be used for product design, manufacturing, and functional operation of a product. For example, you might have a hydroelectric dam. One could create a digital copy of the physical asset and feed the copy operational data so that when you look at the digital version, it's akin to looking at the physical dam and its operations. This is a very powerful tool for supply chains. Too often we struggle to get basic visibility, that is not Excel-based or real-time, into our end-to-end supply chains. However, it is more crucial to have this capability as part of creating more secure supply chain designs. This is important given the complexity that third parties bring to the equation, especially when it comes to crucial operations like contract manufacturing, contract packing, and third-party logistics providers. The digital twin helps solve this problem by combining all this third party into a digital supply chain control tower for end-to-end visibility. This enables us to apply end-to-end intelligence in service to security, which improves risk management and resilience. Say we have 10 contract manufacturers all operating at various levels of capacity. Ideally, we'll have a view into inventory and capacity of all 10. That way we can allocate orders based on capacity. But what happens when one manufacturer suddenly stops operating due to a disruption? How do we rebalance the capacity with the others? If the producer owns all the manufacturing facilities, they should have the visibility within their network to rebalance and reallocate. But because all the contractors are external in this example, how do we get the data we need to understand this decision? The same applies to collaboration, where we need to share visibility into forecasting and production and track the back and forth exchanges with our suppliers. Here, the digital twin concept is so useful to secure supply chain design. If we take this example further, we can start to model future outcomes. You can visualize the optimal outcomes and inefficiencies. This is where a dashboard is an old construct. Instead, we can just quote-unquote ChatGPT it by asking an AI-powered interface to tell us the answer. I'm using ChatGPT only for illustration purposes. This is the level of sophistication we need. Ultimately, greater connectivity to multi-enterprise and effective data exchange allow us to repurpose and rebalance nimbly across third parties. Sidebar: you can think like a hacker. Visualizing the risk across a global supply chain can seem overwhelming, but most of the work involves asking the right questions. Here's an exercise to get your mind used to asking risk questions. You and I are standing outside your house or apartment. What does the physical security look like? Are the doors locked? Do they have deadbolts? How many spare keys do you have? Who has them? Are your windows locked? Do you have an alarm? Do you have a dog or two? Let that go. Now, same exercise, but from a digital point of view. We're standing outside your house. How many digital devices do you have? How many laptops, tablets, and smartphones? How many smart thermostats, cameras, refrigerators, garage door openers, sprinkler controllers, baby monitors, toys, drones, Apple Watches, gaming consoles, and Alexa devices do you have? Are they all patched? If you have kids, do you know what apps and websites they're going to and what malware they're bringing back? Let that go. As we're standing outside your house, what prevents me from accessing those devices on your network? Your router or your firewall? Is it patched? Do you know the password? Has the router reset itself and defaulted to the generic password? I can try that, or I can just crack your Wi-Fi password because the encryption used is very weak. I'm afraid you have some significant gaps in your digital security. This is just the beginning of the exercise. Each of us every day is creating large amounts of digital exhaust that makes us susceptible to cyber attacks. We leave behind email, e-commerce, text, WhatsApp messages, social media posts, and so forth. This visualization helps you to see where risk lives. Risk management is unlike any other supply chain function. There is no playbook, and you can't pre-script it or learn it from an online course. The risk factors, how we operate supply chains, and the business structure are all constantly changing. Imagine the vaccine example we discussed at the beginning and how much opportunity there is to introduce risk into your supply chain. Nobody's going to walk up to your front door and attack. They will find the vulnerability nobody suspects, exploit it, and then take a free ride up the supply chain. That's what the SolarWinds attack was about. This is why a whole risk classification is called, quote-unquote, supply chain attack. It's nefarious actors and it's equally accidents and mistakes. So I want to ask you, where are the weaknesses in your supply chain? If you knew all of them, would you have trouble sleeping at night? In more practical terms, everyone who operates any part of a supply chain has the wherewithal to identify and remediate supply chain vulnerabilities. In other words, you already have the knowledge, you just need to know where to look. Despite the triteness of my last statement, what I'm suggesting here is that to do risk management effectively, you need a culture of curiosity. You need to create an environment that supports this open line of inquiry, or more succinctly, you have to start hacking your supply chains. For example, how many of you take the annual security training every year? Inevitably, there is going to be a phishing module, which will try to teach you how to spot a malicious email and what you should do or not do with it. If you click on the link, what happens? The main takeaway here is take nothing for granted. Nobody is as secure as they think they are. The moment people say they are secure is the moment they are the most vulnerable because they don't understand the magnitude of the problem. More problematically, risk management is not just a singular problem, but a collective problem. Near-term decisions, long-term ramifications. Many companies are underutilizing today's solutions and leaving a lot of their capabilities on the table. It's like using a Ferrari to drive the kids to school or dogs to doggy daycare. All too often, we're solving visibility problems from 10 years ago. Many of the supply chain issues we're dealing with today are there because of the choices a previous generation of leaders made. These folks acquiesce to IT. To every supply chain leader out there today, your choices will have effects long after you retire. It's not too alarmist to say that even the existence of the company might have as much to do with what the current supply chain leadership implements. I hate to frame it this way, but it's time for some hard truths. If yesterday's mistake was fealty to big ERP, today's leadership mistakes are believing in an AI solution. I watch all of these AI solutions go in, generate hype, and then splutter as they try to scale. The reason is obvious. The data is not where it needs to be. Therefore, I have little interest in AI solutions. I'm extremely focused on solutions that improve data collection and management at scale. These solutions excite me because once I have the data, the algorithms will naturally follow. More importantly, this is where our algorithmic literacy and digital competency come in because with the data, we can use the power of AI to create bespoke intelligence for our organizations. Hacking supply chain design, 5 takeaways. 1. Risk sits in liminal spaces. 2. Make it simple, make it secure. 3. Stop using email to run your supply chain. 4. Design for zero trust. 5. Employ digital twins to model third-party risk.